Well, welcome to biology. This time around, we're taking a look at plants and how plants are able to transport nutrients around their bodies. The reason for taking a look at plants is that we want to start to compare and contrast that not all living organisms have a circulatory system like humans and other animals do. Certainly, other organisms like plants still need to be able to transport nutrients around their bodies, need to be able to exchange waste products and things like that that are all part of how the circulatory system works. And yet when we cut open a plant, we don't find arteries and veins, we don't find a heart to help push blood around the bodies. And so how do plants transport these nutrients? We want to start to make some comparisons. There are some definite similarities. I think you'll find that as we take a look here at plant transport. There are also some definite differences. Overall, as we take a look at this section, we want you to be thinking about what materials plants need to transport in the first place, what parts of plants are used in transport, and then ultimately, sort of like the physiology that we just completed, how are these materials transported through the plant? So we're going to be doing a little bit of anatomy and physiology all at the same time within this plant part. And just as a side note, this is something we're going to be doing with each and every unit. We'll take a look at how animals, humans are able to do whatever it is. So our next unit is about the digestive system. We'll take a look at the human digestive system, parts and functions. But then we'll also draw some comparisons to plants too and see what sort of themes we find present in there too. Anyway, plants. In your notes packet there, one of the things to know is that there's a term that gets used here that we're going to use quite a bit, and it's called vascular tissue. Plants need a way to transport materials through their bodies also, and vascular tissue is part of this plant itself. The definition that we're going to go with is that vascular tissue would be cells used by the plant to transport nutrients in water. Like you have arteries and veins, plants have vascular tissue, though the term is going to be a little bit misleading. For humans have vascular tissue too. It's their arteries and veins. In fact, if somebody needs to have a finger reattached, if they happen to lose it in an accident, they might need to go see a vascular surgeon, and that surgeon would be responsible for reattaching all the arteries and veins as part of that surgery. However, in this unit, we'll specifically refer to vascular tissue as being parts of plants. And there are two different types of vascular tissue that plants have. One is called xylem. Xylem is made out of dead cells that form pipes that extend from the roots all the way up to the tops of the plants. And so in this cross-section of a plant here, we're taking a look at the vascular tissue. The whole thing that's stained here in red and blue is vascular tissue. In particular, the xylem are these larger cells. And so if we're looking at a cross-section, you can imagine that these cells would extend out of the screen towards you and then also down below the screen. Dead cells stacked on each other to form pipes. And the xylem's job is to carry water from the roots through the leaves. Within this set of vascular tissue, we also find phloem, and phloem are these tinier cells in blue. And these tinier cells are made from living cells, and they are also arranged in stacks to form pipes or tubes. But these living cells have the job of transporting food, and in the world of plants, that food is sugar. But what you can think of here to help yourself out is that phloem and food both have that F sort of sound. And so if you're trying to remember which type of cell transports what, food and phloem, sugar within the phloem, and then if you want to, X, xylem, W, water, both at the ends of the alphabet, maybe just some way of helping yourself remember. Something else to know before we fill out that chart. Something else to know about xylem is that it only transports material in one direction, and that direction is up. Phloem, on the other hand, that food can be carried in multiple directions, both up and down. One way to consider this is that when you water a plant, if it's the middle of summer and you need to water a plant, your parents ask you to go water the plants in the garden. You don't take that hose and spray the leaves of the plants in the garden, the bean plants and the pea plants and the tomato plants. You don't just spray water on the leaves and say, job's done, right? I mean, you might, but I think your parents would be a little upset and the plants wouldn't end up getting the water they need. You don't water the leaves, you have to water the roots. And the reason for that is that that water is absorbed through the roots. The plants still need water too, but that water is going to get there from the roots all the way up to the leaves. And that's because xylem only works in one direction, up. On the other hand, food, sugar, is transported in all directions. The leaves, photosynthesis takes place in the leaves, and the roots are going to store some of that sugar, especially during the winter when the plant doesn't have any leaves available. And so that sugar is going to be transported down to the roots, and then when the plant needs access to the sugar, that sugar is going to be transported from the roots back up towards the top of the plant. And so for phloem, that food can be transported in multiple directions depending on the needs of the plant and what's going on with photosynthesis. To fill out that chart, here's what xylem transports. There's actually 3 different things. One of the things that xylem transports is water. In addition, anything that's dissolved in that water is going to be transported. And so minerals, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium are all things that are dissolved in that water and would be transported in the xylem too. And a third thing that's transported in xylem is hormones. Hormones, there are a whole bunch of different hormones that plants use to respond to their environment, some of which are involved in reproduction, but others are there just to help roots start to grow or to help a plant bend towards the light. So some hormones are dissolved in water, and so that's something that the xylem would transport as well. For phloem, we've already mentioned the food, which again is in the form of sugar. But in addition, other things are found in the phloem. Oxygen is something that can be transported in the phloem. And then there are some hormones that just dissolve better in the sugar environment, and so some hormones are transported there too. You have an image here too, a cross section of a plant. And as we take a look, I want you to be able to identify different layers here. One of the layers working our way from the outside in this cross section would be the epidermis. The epidermis is the outer edge of this cross section of the stem, or even a cross section of a root. Epidermis for you would be your skin. It's the outer layer of cells. And so here we've got the outer layer of cells in this plant tissue, and that would also be the epidermis. The next layer in is called the cortex. The cortex is this layer that's between the epidermis and the vascular tissue that's on the inside. So this is where we're going to find the xylem and phloem. So epidermis on the outside, cortex between the epidermis and the vascular tissue, and then now the vascular cylinder or the vascular tissue itself. That vascular tissue, if we zoom in, is made out of larger cells called xylem, and then the smaller cells that are tucked into the corner called phloem. So make sure you label your diagram so you kind of know what you're looking for, especially when you start to see the different slide examples that you'll see in lab. One way to remember perhaps that the xylem are the larger cells is that water is really important. I mean, so is food, right? But if you don't water those plants, especially during the summer, if you have them in a pot or in your garden, if you don't water them every day, that's a problem. They're still going to need sugar, but sugar may be a little less important on a daily basis. And so xylem, larger cells. It's not exactly why they're larger, but it might be a way of remembering. So those are the parts, xylem, phloem, and those other parts that you just labeled like epidermis and cortex. But now we need to start to take a look at how this works. How are plants able to transport water, especially if they don't have a heart? You know, for us with the heart, that heart beats, and when the heart beats, that pushes the blood around the body. But there's no heart inside a plant. And yet plants have to be able to move water and sugar. They have to be able to move that, in many cases, from the roots way to the top of the plant, which for a bean plant might not be that tall, but for an oak tree, that's going to be many dozens of feet. And so how does that work? Well, there's a variety of different chemical properties that plants are able to take advantage of, and one of which is something that you learned about last semester called osmosis. And you learned last semester that for osmosis, this means that water flows from high to low concentration. In the case of plants, that's true, but there's also a pathway that the plant is going to use to be able to move that water from outside the plant to inside the plant to into the roots and into the xylem in particular. And so in this diagram, the blue is representing water that's inside the soil. So here's all these soil particles. And on the outside of the plant, there are these little tiny root hairs. These root hairs are there to help absorb water. And once the water is in high concentration in the soil and low concentration in the root hair, the water will flow from high to low concentration into the root hair. We're not into the xylem yet. And so once the root hair fills up with water, then we move into the next layer, which would be the epidermis, and then through the cortex, and then into the endodermis, which is an inner layer of cells that surrounds the xylem, and then eventually into the xylem. Step by step, moving from high concentration to low concentration. And so we call this type of osmosis successive, not successful, that's different. Successive means moving from one layer to the next to the next. So a pathway, getting the water from the soil into the xylem. And again, endodermis, here we've got the epidermis on the outside, cortex, this is the vascular tissue, so xylem and phloem. Endodermis would be a layer of cells that surrounds the xylem and phloem. There's a benefit too of having root hairs. This is a corn seedling. This is a root from that corn seedling. And on that root, there are a whole bunch of little tiny hairs. You wouldn't think about roots as having hairs, and yet there they are. And what that all those hairs allow the root to be able to do is to increase their surface area. By having more surface area, there's a heck of a lot more room for that water to start to move into the plant. If it was a smooth root, there's not a lot of room for the water to get in. And so by having more surface area, you give more of an opportunity for the water to get into the root hairs and then ultimately working its way successive osmosis into the xylem. Once the root water gets into the xylem, now we need to start to move the water up the plant. There are two different features of water that are important to keep in mind. One is cohesion and what is adhesion. Cohesion, water molecules stick together, and adhesion, water molecules stick to other surfaces. They adhere. With cohesion and adhesion, one way that you can take a look at this is a demonstration that we're going to show in the lab using capillary tubing. It's really tiny, really thin tubing, and we're going to touch the tubing just to the surface of the water, and even just touching it to the surface is going to allow the water to move up the tubing a little bit. That's because the water molecules start to stick to the sides of the tube. They adhere, and they're also cohesive. They're sticky to other water molecules. It's weird to think about water molecules as being sticky, and yet they are. If you go home tonight and try this experiment, take a glass bottle, take a glass jar that you might use to drink out of, and I want you to pour your favorite beverage into it. When I was a kid, that would have been chocolate milk. I still like chocolate milk, but the fact of the matter is we didn't get chocolate milk much at home. And so when you got it, if mom or dad said, go ahead, pour yourself a glass of chocolate milk, you weren't going to pour that glass half full. You weren't going to pour it 3/4 full. You were going to pour it as full up as you could. And when you do this, you can pour that milk into the container, into that glass, not just even to the top, but slightly above. And that's because the water molecules, or in this case, the milk molecules, still there's water in there, are sticking not only to each other, but they're adhering to the side of the glass, and they can even rise slightly above that rim. Try that out tonight. Go home, take a look and see if that's something that you can do. How much can you pour in there without spilling it? Well, inside the plant, the same thing is true, that once we get water from outside the plant to inside the xylem through that successive osmosis, then the xylem being a long tube, the water molecules are going to adhere to the sides of the tube, and since they're sticky to each other, they're going to rise up the tube. Not a lot, but even a half inch is the beginning of the process of moving that water up the tube, up the xylem. In addition, there's another feature here at play, and it's called turgor pressure. Turgor pressure is the force of the water in the vacuole. Remember, plants have a really large vacuole, and that large vacuole is able to store water. Turgor pressure is the force of the water in the vacuole on the cell walls of that plant. Here we have the cell wall of a plant, and the cell membrane is in black, and this vacuole is filled with water. And when it's filled with water, it pushes up there against the sides of the cell wall, creating a situation where that cell wall, that cell is very tough. It's turgid. And as a result, this plant is able to be upright. It's not floppy. If the plant loses water, the vacuole contracts, and then the cell wall contracts around it as well. Meaning that if there's not much pressure pushing against the sides of the cell wall, then there's not much support for the plant either. And this plant here that's flaccid starts to flop over. If we add water back into the pot, then it's going to extend itself again. It's going to be filled with water, meaning that the cell has the vacuoles filled with water. The pressure is there pushing up against the cell wall. This animation that I'm going to show you here kind of gives you the idea here too. Here we've got a cell wall, and we've got a vacuole where that vacuole is not filled with water. But if we give it time and we put water into the plant, then the vacuole is going to expand. It's going to push up against the sides of the cell wall. The pressure, the turgor pressure inside the cell wall increases, which means the plant is no longer floppy, but instead is going to have the pressure that it needs to be upright. If we reverse the situation, if the plant starts to dry out, then the cell wall isn't going to receive that pressure anymore. When the water leaves the vacuole, the pressure is no longer there against the sides of the plant. That turgor pressure is decreasing. The cells become soft in a sense. And as a result, the plant should wilt. So turgor pressure. The real force that's at play here, though, is this last one, and it's called transpiration. With transpiration, there are holes, gaps inside the cell walls or inside the distance there between each of the different cells that are found in the cell wall, the leaf. And if, as a result, the leaves start to lose water out of the plant this way, they sweat in a sense. But the important part isn't the fact that the water is being lost. It's that as the plant loses that water, it's pulling on the water from below. This is like when you have a straw. When you take a straw and put that into your favorite beverage, there's nothing moving through the straw until you take your mouth and pull on that liquid. And when you pull on the liquid, it's not like you get one drop. It's this continuous flow of water that's going to start to move. Well, transpiration is a very important process. Transpiration accounts for 90% of the water that's absorbed from the roots that ends up being lost or transpired out of the plant through the leaves. 90% is a heck of a lot. That means a tomato plant loses 25 gallons of water every single season, and even corn plants lose even more, 51 gallons of water that a plant absorbs through the roots that it's transpiring out through the leaves. I mean, that's a heck of a lot of water. Think about a tomato plant that has to lose all this water just to move water through the plant. Tomatoes, the amount of tomatoes that you harvest isn't 25 gallons worth of tomatoes. That's a large amount of water that the plant is moving through there. But it's an important feature that these plants have, because again, without a heart, there's no way to pump the blood or pump the water through the system. So instead, what has to happen is that the plant has to lose the water, transpiring it, pulling it through from below, and that's really the major factor here for how plants are are moving water through their systems. For phloem, remember phloem is sugar. That's the big thing that we're trying to move. Phloem is the tube that sugar moves through. And the concept here is what's referred to as sources and sinks. During the summer, plants are producing sugar in their leaves, and so the concentration of sugar in the leaves is high, and the concentration of sugar in the roots is low. And as a result, through diffusion, that sugar is going to move from areas of high concentration in the roots to low concentration in the roots. High concentration in the leaves to low concentration in the roots. That's an important process because at some point after the summer is done, the leaves aren't going to be there anymore. If you're a plant and you store your sugar in the leaves and then fall comes and all your sugar drops to the forest floor, you're in deep doo-doo for the rest of the winter. Plants don't die, trees don't die during the winter, they're still alive. They need access to that energy, and that energy, that sugar, needs to be stored in the roots. So as a result, by osmosis, during the summer, sugar being made in the leaves is moved to the roots from high to low concentration, diffusion. At some point in the spring, however, there are buds that start to form, and those buds need energy to start to open up. They don't have a lot of sugar to begin with, and so sugar that's in high concentration in the roots is going to start to move towards the leaves. Again, diffusion, high concentration to low concentration. This process is happening or going to be happening real soon here in Wisconsin, especially with maple trees. With maple trees and the maple syrup that we can start to collect, that sap that we can collect, what happens is as the plant starts to warm up, as the buds start to form and need energy, the plant is going to start to send that sugar through the phloem up towards the buds using diffusion. And we know this if you've ever gone and tapped a maple tree, if you've ever gone to a maple tree farm and seen how they tap those trees. What they're doing is they're getting access to the phloem. The plant is moving the sugar up through diffusion, but by tapping the tree, you're allowing some of that sugar to leak out. You have to collect all that sugar water, you have to boil off a lot of the water so it concentrates into syrup, but that's what's going on during the springtime. The plants are moving the sugar from high to low concentration. The source, where's the sugar? In the summer, it's in the leaves. In the winter, it's in the roots. And the sink is where it's going. In the summer, that sugar is being sent to the sink, which would be in the roots, the low concentration. In the winter, in the springtime, that sink ends up being in the leaves because that's where the low concentration is. That's it. Understanding parts is part of it. Understanding the physiology, how this all works, is the other part. And that's really what the next few days in lab are all about. A chance to see what xylem and phloem looks like. They aren't all the same in every single type of plant. And also seeing how these different examples of how water is moved and how sugar is moved through plants, how that works, how you can see that in action. If you have any questions, let us know. Otherwise, thanks for taking notes, and we'll see you in class.